Hi everybody, and welcome to the lead up to World War II. I figured this would be an easier way to get all the lecturing done. It's a lot shorter than the 3 45-minute lectures it would have been, because we all know a lecture day takes the whole day. And this way we can have more discussion in class and we can go over the material a little more in depth. That said, for those of you in my class, and perhaps Ms. Jenkins's class, you will have to turn in notes the day of your exam, and there will be quizzes on the information on these videos, so make sure you are watching them. So let's get started. Here's our favorite bad guy right there. That would be Adolf Hitler, leader of the Axis powers, and we're going to find out how this man gets there through the course of the next couple weeks. This is going to be fun. So the whole goal is to explain how these dictators and militarist regimes arose in the 1930s, the actions taken by aggressive regimes in Europe and Asia, namely Japan, Germany, Italy, and analyze the responses by Britain, France, and the United States to these aggressive regimes, which you'll find out not the best. You guys should be pausing this, looking at these vocabularies. If you don't know these people, if you don't know this vocabulary, please write it down. It's going to go for these as well. And I will be using them for the most part throughout, but just make sure that you have them down. You need to know these things. So, how do we get totalitarianism after World War One? It's not hard. Wilson wanted, through his 14 points, peace without victory, and he thought that that would eliminate animosity, leaving World War One. But because the Allied powers were so adamant in vengeance and being vindictive, in really sticking it to Germany, namely, you're going to find a lot of animosity coming from the central-ish Europe nations. In some countries, people turn to new leaders who would be responsible for creating an even deadlier global conflict. These new leaders promised them the world when they had nothing. And so they were just looking for any spark of hope, and these leaders were charismatic, highly intelligent, and highly capable people in convincing their populace, or populi, that they were the answer to the problem. So again, quick recap, World War I is over, Germany surrenders, you have this uneasy peace. The Treaty of Versailles humiliates the Germans. Italy and Japan are angered by the treaty because they expected to receive more as a result of the Allied victory. But they were kind of left out of everything. Great Britain, France, the United States, they're the ones that really won out of this. You have this worldwide depression after the war. You had that influenza that killed 20 million people worldwide. Things aren't looking up right now. So you start having these nations turning towards a new form of government. And we say that it's a new form of government, but we've seen this in antiquity. It's just new for the modern era. There's a single party dictatorship that exerts control over all aspects of life. There's always going to be a strong, charismatic leader at the head of government. The state is going to control the economy. You're going to have a police force, spies, and terror to enforce the will of the state. And this is really, really, really true, especially in the 3 European nations we're going to talk about. When you talk about either the Gestapo or the SS or the Browncoats, they're all secret police that everybody knows is looking for a reason just to send them to prison, to a gulag, or to kill them. The government's going to control the media and use propaganda to indoctrinate citizens. They're going to use schools and youth organizations to spread ideology to children. And you're going to have strict censorship of the arts, intellectuals, and political rivals with dissenting opinions. And in the communist state, you're going to have a kind of de-Christianization of the Soviet Union, with church buildings becoming government buildings. It's going to be very interesting. You have three main totalitarian governments arising in the 1930s. Stalin in the Soviet Union, Mussolini in Italy, and Adolf Hitler in Germany. And all three of those are going to arise out of economic issues, a lot of economic issues leading to political stress. Like I said before, These leaders are going to promise to bring jobs, food, prosperity, money. They're going to make their countries great again. Germany talks about the new empire, the Third Empire, the Third Reich. Italy talks about the resurgence of the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, because both of those can exist at the same time. And Soviet Union is going to talk about this new hammer and sickle policy, the idea of industry and farming leading to prosperity in Russia. Honestly, though, they didn't really do any of those things. Stalin is very famously going to say one death is a tragedy, while 20 million deaths is a statistic. And he actually is blamed for about 20 million deaths during his rule. Lenin dies. Joseph Stalin was the next person in the Communist Party, and everybody looked to him for leadership. He tries to turn the Soviet Union into industrial power. Didn't work out too greatly, but it did industrialize the Soviet Union. They did force people to work in factories and state-run farms. They did kill or imprison suspected traitors during the Great Terror, and that's where they started purging all of the Soviet Union and sending them to these work camps. And he ruled through fear and propaganda. Italy is going to be much of the same way. You have a government that was unable to deal with the country's problems. You have Benito Mussolini forming this fascist party, and then having these black shirts, his followers, fight and help him get to power. The Duke, Il Duce, took control of the government using secret police to maintain control. The black shirts became popular for two things. One, they maintained order and they helped the poor. And then as Mussolini started getting more and more power, they became very famous for making sure that you agreed with Mussolini and voted for him, if you guys get my drift. And then you had the Weimar Republic, who struggled just so terribly after World War I. And you have Adolf Hitler appointed chancellor. He's going to seize power and create a totalitarian state. Hopefully you guys learned how during your world history class. He rebuilds the nation's army, which was against the Treaty of Versailles. He's going to control the press and education system. He's going to make sure that we teach these kids early that the way to go is the new Nazi way to be. He is going to have unlimited power, unlimited resources, and a secret police to make sure that everybody follows what it is that he believes in. He is openly anti-Semitic, attacks Jews, blames them for all the country's problems. Japan kind of sort of didn't really become a dictatorship, but the Emperor of Japan did kind of take a back seat to one of their strong military leaders. And that military leader thought that there would be a lot of economic success and conquest, especially the area of Manchuria in China. And that area is very rich in soil, a perfect area for Japan to have started their conquest of East Asia. They pillaged Nanking, most notably. It's something that we will talk about in class. It is just absolutely brutal. What do you get in the 1930s? You have Germany illegally rebuilding military, reclaiming Saar region from France. They invaded the Rhineland. You have Anschluss, and they then invaded the Sudetenland. Italy invades Ethiopia. Spain, the fascist government there, rebels. You get the Spanish Civil War, which ends right about the beginning of World War II. And you have Japan conquering Manchuria and parts of China. So you have this massive aggression from these powers. The League of Nations did almost nothing because they had almost nothing they could do. They fear involvement in another war. They don't want it to happen. They think that the Soviet Union was the greatest threat to the world, more so even than the Nazis. And they kind of embrace this policy of isolationism. You do you, we do us, and everybody's happy. So what do we come to a conclusion of? We decide, you know what, let's just appease Adolf Hitler. This is Neville Chamberlain, British Prime Minister at the time, one of the worst Prime Minister in British history. And he just says, you know what, go ahead and keep the territory you've already taken, guys. Just keep it. We understand. just don't do it again. Just don't go any further. It was this idea of appeasement. We appease them, it'll stop going. And that's where we get to the start of World War II in early years. Go ahead and take a break from this video. Start back up at 10:15 so you give yourself a little bit of a stretch. Alright guys, welcome back to the start of World War II in early years. Let's keep it going. The idea is understanding how World War II starts. How do we get into this? What is it that America's doing all this? Because it's a U.S. history class. World history, that was last year. So what do we get? Hitler violates the Munich Pact. He takes over the remainder of Czechoslovakia in 1939. He then invades Poland in September of 1939, and that's when Britain and France declare war on Germany. This is where the start of World War II happens. Now, what's really important is Hitler had a secret agreement with the Soviet Union and Stalin. Stalin invades Poland from the east and takes half of Poland, while Germany invades Poland from the west and takes the other half. Germans then launch a series of attacks. They call it Blitzkrieg in football. That's why we call it a blitz. They take Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. The war does not look like it's going the right way. By May of 1940, less than a year into actual World War II, Germany enters France, and in 35 days, most of France is occupied. The French have Vichy France, but it's kind of a puppet government. Hitler then decides we need to knock out Britain before America can get into this war, and so in the beginning of July of 1940, he begins the Battle of Britain, which is not a conventional battle. It's a series of bombings over the British sky. London is pummeled. The British are going to hide in shelters and darkened homes. They're going to hide in the subway. And the British still hold on, thanks to their Prime Minister. Not Neville Chamberlain. No. Winston Churchill. Europe was at war again. And you have major powers around the world. You have Germany, Italy, Japan versus Britain, France, the Soviet Union, United States, and China. You think to yourself, wait, Mr. Singer, you just said that Hitler and the Soviet Union, they had a pact. Well, we haven't gotten there yet, but at some point, Hitler makes the greatest mistake every general has made, and they try to invade the Soviet Union in winter. This is going to be very important and very, very foolish. But instead of keeping the Soviet Union as an ally until they can knock out the rest of the allies, they actually get greedy and attack the Soviet Union, so the Soviets join the Allies. So here's a really good map of this. You see that over the course of about 2 years, Germany is able to control almost all of Europe. It actually controlled all of Western and Eastern Europe, and it pushed into the Asian side of Russia. And that is going to be really, really huge. People thought that Hitler was unstoppable. Congress, at the beginning of this war, declares neutrality. They're like, listen, we already said before we wouldn't get into this again. And then they're like, well, we should maybe help these European democracies, so we'll pass the Neutrality Act. And that's going to be passed in 1939. And it contains a cash and carry provision. So, if Britain or France or any of the Allies wanted weapons, they had to come to the United States with cash and purchase them. We would not lend it out in credit because we didn't want something to happen like it happened in World War I, where entire economies failed because no one could pay us back. We get another Selective Service Act, so we get a draft, and we give Britain battleships in exchange for defense bases. So it was kind of a trade. We have isolationists and interventionists again. I want you to pause this and really check this out, because it's pretty much the same thing all over again, but I want you to understand where we're going with this. As things start getting a little hairy overseas, he talks about really wanting to fight for the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And these 4 freedoms are what American presidents are going to say we need to fight for over and over and over again as we go to war. And he's going to argue that all these freedoms are threatened by German and Japanese militarism. As things get even worse, as France gets pushed out of the war, as Germany keeps pushing further and further through Europe, Congress approves the Lend-Lease Act. And this pretty much a declaration of war. We say that we are willing to lend or lease out our weapons, expecting these weapons to come back. I mean, seriously, are these weapons really going to come back? But people are still going to remain divided at home. They don't want to get involved in another world war. In 1941, you have Winston Churchill signing the Atlantic Charter with the United States, and that pretty much gives us an alliance. German submarines begin firing on American ships, just like World War I, and we start seeing war being inevitable. Roosevelt's very famously going to say in Congress that we are too busy not paying attention to the real threat to the world. Our boys at home are busy making refrigerators while the Germans are making bombs. How do we get officially into the war? Well, Pearl Harbor. We have this huge tension mounted between the United States and Japan, and we know that it's inevitable. We condemn Japanese aggression. We slow Japanese expansion with an embargo. Hideki Tojo decides it was time to eliminate the United States presence in the Pacific. If they can knock us out there, they can pretty much knock us out of the eastern side of the war. And so he's going to decide to attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941. It was a surprise attack. They had an ambassador stalling here in the United States, and then all of a sudden, boom. Luckily, a lot of our ships were out on maneuvers away from the island, and American ingenuity allows us to put these ships back together piecemeal. We'll talk more about these later. We declare war on Japan. Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, then declare war on us. So we have to then declare war on them. We have this huge wave of patriotism. I mean, imagine we get sucker punched, kind of 9/11-ish, where people just start jumping into the military. You have Americans joining the military, the Red Cross and other organizations. You have them rearing to fight. You have the Women's Army Corps, the Army Nurse Corps, all these auxiliaries. You have Americans taking new jobs, making weapons and supplies to support the war effort. And this is officially where the Great Depression ends. We just ramp up for war, and let me tell you, we are pretty good at it. Companies that once produced consumer goods, they're mobilized to build ships, planes, and tanks. There are going to be 3 car industries that go bankrupt after World War II because they couldn't switch back to be car plants fast enough. We have all these jobs all over again. It just spikes for us. We make more tanks, more planes, more guns, more bombs than every other nation. It is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, a plane every 60 seconds in the United States. The outlook for the United States is grim. There's dominance of the Pacific. They have technologically advanced weapons. They are highly motivated and well trained, and culturally, the Japanese aren't one to ever really give up. Very famously, the last Japanese soldier to surrender was in 1975. He didn't know the war was over. He was just living on an island. They take Guam, the Wake Islands, and Hong Kong from the Allies. They move to the Philippines, forcing General MacArthur to retreat, who vows that he will return. The rest of the troops were trapped and taken as prisoners. And after that siege, thousands more are going to die when they're forced to walk to prison camps during the Bataan Death March, and we'll cover that more in class. You see on this map, if you want to pause and look at it, the Japanese were really good at just pushing us back and back and back and back. We eventually get the very important American victory at the Battle of Coral Sea. Very, very important. You have Colonel Doolittle's raid on Tokyo, which surprises Japan. And so we get this shift. Fortunately, we had the island of Australia to help us out and those allies. And we'll talk more about the war, but now you guys understand what got us there in Europe, at home, and geopolitically. If you have any questions, please write them down. Make sure you take notes and study for your quizzes. Thanks, guys.